Awesome, thank you. So the way we're running this tonight is that if you have questions, we're going to kind of save them towards the end. And if you think of them, just put them in the chat and we'll record them, and then we'll bring them all together, and we'll try not to forget anybody. But if we have forgotten something, feel free to raise your hand and let us know. But yes, welcome. My name is Julia Bonheim, and I am the Rise Above Plastic campaign lead this year, which is so exciting. My particular goal is to bring more awareness to the waste problem and the reuse possibilities in the world, and just to open up the conversation a little bit. So I'm really excited to be talking about synthetic turf tonight, because I think it's not a conversation that we really talk about very often. Hopefully there'll be more. Surfrider Foundation is dedicated to the protection and enjoyment of the world's oceans, waves, and beaches through a powerful grassroots activist network. So that's all of us. And we are a national organization. Here's a fun map of our mini victories, which is awesome to see. This was just last year. You can see in the Pacific Northwest that we have 7. So I particularly want to highlight what happened in Newport, where we passed the plastic foodware ordinance. It includes polystyrene, a ban on polystyrene, asking for to go where if you want it, so making it by request, and requiring reusable foodware if you're dining in. So that's all really big, and we're really proud of it. And then in Jordan Cove, it's been a 10-year fight, and amongst multiple community activists and organizations, including Surfrider, it was killed this year. So hooray for that. Hopefully there could be more major wins coming up. Our Portland chapter programs are Green Streets, Ocean Friendly Restaurants, and Rise Above Plastics, and Blue Water Task Force. We have some fun pictures on here from the Oswald West Halloween cleanup, and the Selwood Action Day, and the Break Free from Plastic Pollution press conference that we held with Senator Merkley. And that was just a few of the things that we've done. And then I want to highlight that next month we have, on February 9th, the offshore wind energy meeting, which I want to tell you a little bit more about. So we'll be hearing from federal and state agencies and a variety of stakeholders about the current process for siting offshore wind energy and what it would mean for Oregon. So I think, yet again, that's a conversation that is going to become really big, that we need to start having now, and understand kind of where we stand on it. There's some positives and there's some negatives, and I hope that some of you can join us next month. And then even sooner, on Monday, on January 17th, we have our MLK Cleanup Day, which we've been doing for a few years now. And so the location has changed on that one. It's going to be held outside of Evo, but hopefully you can come to that too. Then, of course, this is mostly run by volunteers. We would love to have you join us. You could also become a member for $25 or more if you want. This picture on the right here is a bundle that you can receive, which is a t-shirt and a bumper sticker and subscription to the newsletter and the print newsletter. And I believe that is all that's included, and that's for $60. So that would be very helpful to us and hopefully fun for you. And then this is just to say that these major storms have really brought in a lot of trash on the beach, and we could use your hands if you are going to the beach to bring a bucket and help clean it up. So thank you for that. And I want to introduce Kathleen Michels. I hope I'm pronouncing her last name correctly. She's joining us from Safe and Healthy Playing Fields. And Kathleen has a PhD in neurobiology and more than 30 years of experience conducting, managing, and reviewing biomedical research related to global public health. She's helped start and volunteers for a number of grassroots environmental nonprofits. She is here representing Safe and Healthy Playing Fields. So they're doing some major work, and I am so excited to hear what she wants to share with us. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Kathleen. Whoop, that's our next guest. Kathleen, would you like to share your screen?
Yes, I'm going to try. Okay, that's why I should have done this ahead of time. Okay, where is my drive? I thought it had, okay, here's my stuff. Okay, can you see that?
We see a file window.
You see a file window. Okay, that's not, this is, I always thought, hold on, let me see why.
I think
Can you see that?
only that window was shared. So you might need to stop sharing, and then when you click share screen again, select the PowerPoint.
All right, let me try that.
It's not a Zoom meeting unless there's some sort of hiccup.
Right, and I've done this before. I don't know why. Usually it goes without. Now I can't get it to. I can't seem to get my full screen here. So you can't see the PowerPoint, right?
No, I think I can help you out by stopping the sharing.
Yeah, stop the sharing and okay. Let's try that again. I'm going to see if I pull up the PowerPoint and then share screen. Okay, we hopefully. Oh. So what are you seeing now?
Now we see the PowerPoint.
But you see, do you see one or two? Because I'm seeing two on my screen.
Two, so it's not in the presenting mode yet.
Huh.
You start the
Oh, right. Okay.
slideshow.
Let's try that. There we go. Can you see that?
There we go. Perfect.
And I've been admitting Elizabeth. Okay, and I've got to somehow, let's see. Okay, there we go. All right. Sorry about the glitches there, folks. Thank you very much, Julia, for inviting me, and I'm really eager to find out more about the Surfriders as well. I have a brother who lives in Portland, and my parents are living with them now, and I'm actually going to get a gift Surfriders subscription for them, and I would like to join the Surfriders myself. So this is a really nice opportunity to bring this particular issue to the Surfriders, and it's very important for marine, as far as the marine plastics, both in terms of solid waste and chemical pollution as well, and the microplastics. So this slide, kind of in a nutshell, I mean, I almost don't need to go further. We could even talk just from this slide. But one of the key points is, I bring up the Lorax. This issue, like many of them, has taken a lot of people to care a whole lot to bring it to people's attention. And often, like a lot of the issues we get involved in, it's been taking a lot more time than we thought. So as the Lorax is saying, so here, imagine if this was all plastic grass instead of real grass, and not to mention even the truffula trees. So what's the problem with synthetic turf? The bottom line is it's a literal hot mess of plastic. And the story is that in a nutshell. I mean, it's literally hot. It's an individual field for synthetic turf fields, and they can also be used for lawns, is several acres of it's toxic, it's hard, it's a plastic carpet rolled out on rocks. It's hotter than asphalt. It injures players. It produces a huge volume of waste during its lifespan because it breaks down, as plastic always does. Carbon intensive. The plastic is made of petroleum, petrochemicals, cracked gas, and petroleum, along with the chemicals that are made from petroleum. It's unsustainable, incredibly expensive. So what are the benefits? Why are they doing this? Well, in large part, especially for you at the high school, college, and particularly the pro levels, it's good for video. It's shiny and it's green and it stays that way until it breaks down, in which case they kind of tell you not to pay attention to it until they can put in a new one for a lot of money. And it's touted as being low maintenance, but it's not, because if it's maintained the way it's supposed to be, it actually costs just as much to maintain as grass, but just different kinds of maintenance. Now, grass can be constructed and maintained to be durable and rainout resistant at much, much lower cost in very many ways, much lower actual dollar cost, lower cost to the environment, and lower cost to health and safety. And what are the benefits of grass? It's grass and soil oxygenate and cool the air and filter the water, are soft and sustainable. So what's not to like? So I just brought up synthetic turf. Not all of you may be aware of what synthetic turf is, and that's part of the problem, because it's like the million-pound elephant in the room. A lot of people, unless they've played soccer or unless they have children who have played soccer or football, they may not have even seen it, even when it's practically in their own backyards or next to their houses. And when I say I've not seen it, they've seen it with their eyes, but they haven't registered exactly what it is. And that's the big problem. People aren't aware that it's this huge amount of plastic. So an average field, football fields are smaller, soccer fields are larger regulations. So, but an average field is about 80,000 square feet, which is greater than 2 acres. And then each field carpet, or even a lawn carpet, has this backing. It usually has a woven backing. And then the tufts, the plastic tufts are woven into it. And they're literally woven on looms in the places where carpeting are normally made, such as Dalton, Georgia. And one of the things I'll point out later, one of the things that has made this possible is the PFAS forever chemicals that you've heard about, because it keeps these blades from sticking to the extrusion machinery that they use. And you can see there's a lot of these blades. So really, before PFAS chemicals, it probably wasn't possible on a large scale. So these carpets have about 40,000 pounds of that, just a single carpet. And then there's a combination of usually rubber granules, shredded tire rubber granules, and sand together, although there's other kinds of infill, as I'll tell you later. And that's to keep these blades upright, because otherwise they fall down. Oops, I need to go there yet. And this actually is about 400,000 pounds the infill. So, and a lot of that gets lost. A lot of both of these actually get lost during the life. They disintegrate into air, soil, and water. And the big problem is that all this plastic displaces the grass and soil, which would otherwise filter pollutants and oxygenate the air, and then add pollutants instead. So I just wanted to show this because artificial turf has actually made it onto the radar screen as far as a source of microplastics. Automotive tires are the biggest source. And because of all these pulverized tires that are used in artificial turf, it kind of brings the toxic automotive tire microplastics into places where it wouldn't be. So it makes it a point source of tire wear particles, plus the plastic itself in the blades, which breaks down into microplastics into the air, soil, and water. So synthetic turf, what are the microplastic sources in synthetic turf? So the plastic carpet fibers disintegrate, and these are some pictures of actually fields that are representative of fields you can go to almost anywhere. And this was actually one of the really expensive fields in our area at a school close to me. And this is they're hugely expensive field, and you can see the plastic just disintegrating and breaking down. That's all plastic fibers. It's a handful of the plastic fibers, and this is the carpeting as it's rolled up and taken away. And where away is one of the questions. They're dumped, they're landfilled. Nobody really knows because nobody's regulating it. So that's one of the problems. And then the infill that I mentioned, usually it's this tire crumb, and this is scooped up from the drains, and you can see the fibers in there, and then the tire crumb that's washing off the field, going into the storm drains and the waterways. So the tire crumb is what's most commonly used, but another infill that's used is what they call Nike grind. It's basically manufacturing waste. In some ways, I don't know, levels of worst. It floats because it's a lighter rubber, but it's all synthetic waste. This one really bothers me because it's an oxymoron. Envirofill. So sand can be used to hold up the blades, but for some reason they decided to coat sand with plastic. So sand by itself isn't necessarily environmentally bad, although the silica can be a problem to breathe in. So they decided to coat it with plastic. So here you have something that's at least natural, but is coated with plastic, and then it ends up in the waterways. So, and they call it Envirofill. Why, I don't know. So that's, the tire waste is bad enough, but so this is an example of what happens to the used fields when they get dumped. University of Virginia even paid someone to dump their used field on the side of a mountain until somebody noticed and contacted the state regulators, and they said that doesn't belong there, and then it was just moved to another part of that property. And that's just indicative of what's going on with synthetic turf. It's not regulated. It only lasts about 8 years, and that's not even on average. It's like 6 years sometime before it wears out, maybe 10 years. If it goes on longer, it's not good for the players. And as I mentioned earlier, the toxic PFAS forever chemicals are found in synthetic turf and are probably part of the reason synthetic turf is so widely used, because it made it cheap to produce. Here's some other, and I'm not sure, there's a black thing over my my screen. Hopefully it's not over yours, but so where does the tire crumb go? It drains to waterways, and here's some pictures. This black stuff here is coming off this carpet. This actually says, do not pollute, drains to waterways right here. And of course, that's tire crumb down there. And here's a handful of tire crumb in one of the perimeter drains of the fields. Now, the synthetic turf industry itself, this is a presentation from the industry at an industry meeting, and they're fully aware that this is a pollution problem. And so this is a slide that they presented, and they indicate that 1 to 5 tons of microplastic per year per field disappears. That's just think about 1 to 5 tons of microplastic per year per field. And so they say, well, the granules go down to the drain, as we saw. They cling to socks and shoes and then go home with the players. Gets washed down internal drains when the players shower. And then during maintenance, it also goes into the drains. And they note the degradation of the plastic and then the tire crumb washing off. So this is the industry acknowledging, and by the way, the industry has also acknowledged that they use PFAS. And just to give you some scope and scale, a synthetic turf field has been calculated, the plastic in it to be about the equivalent of 3.2 million plastic bags, 46 million plastic straws. So think about that when you're advocating for plastic bag bans, which are incredibly important, straw bans, which are also incredibly important, but then you have this point source of an equivalent amount of plastic just quietly shedding the microplastics right away into the environment. Dr. Brander will probably talk a little bit more about what the problem is with microplastics, but just to note that synthetic turf is a point source of the three categories of microplastic: wear and tear microplastics from the product itself during use. Intentional microplastics would be the infill. So they're granulating tires, and then those granulated tire microplastics beads, basically extra toxic rubber beads, go into air, soil, and water. And then at the end of the life, it's the whole product that ends up being landfilled or dumped, as you saw, often dumped. And it can't really be incinerated. And I can tell you some other places that they've ended up that are pretty horrifying. So I mentioned that, the disintegration and also the amount of pounds of the synthetic turf. So I'll just bypass this, this slide. So one really important take-home point I want to make for all of you, because you're interested in particularly in the water issues, is that synthetic turf is a manufactured waste and should be treated as a waste, as a solid waste in stormwater permit enforcement, not as sediment. It's not soil, it's not natural. It's actually a pollutant, and it should be treated as such. But the part of the problem is, even though it could be treated that way in most stormwater permits and enforcement, right now it's not. There's this invisible, because it looks green and the tire crumb looks like soil, it's treated like that, but it's not. It's a solid waste pollutant. Here's just example of some pictures. And the other point I want to make is synthetic turf is a microplastic Trojan horse. It brings a very concentrated point source of plastic pollution to places that would otherwise be vegetated. And those pollutants are then going to air, soil, and water around those places. So it's basically a plastic Trojan horse. And this is just the tip of the turf berg. Again, here's some pictures of synthetic turf dumped in different places. Just to close out this part of the presentation, the plastic part of the synthetic turf has hormone disrupting chemicals, neurotoxins, immune system disruptors, and carcinogens, such as phthalates, antioxidants, plasticizers, heavy metals, and the pigments, such as lead and cadmium, and the PFAS chemicals, as I mentioned. And the tire crumb just it's like a Pandora's box of toxins. There's over 300 chemicals of known and unknown toxins, including fine particulates, carbon black, lead has been found in tire crumb and in the playgrounds that are made out of it, which I haven't mentioned. That's another issue. Polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, hormone disrupting phthalates, volatile organic compounds such as benzene, aquatic toxins such as zinc, and the recently identified 6-ppd quinone, which is highly toxic to salmon and likely to other fish as well. And here's some resources, and I'm sure that Julia will share these slides with you. And one of the reasons I've highlighted in yellow is one of the things people need to do is to report when there's harm. So people kids are burned on these things and nobody ever reports it. And I'm not sure why. They report other things, but for some reason they don't. And there's children who have been burned on the tire waste playgrounds to the extent that they need surgery. And, I don't know if anyone ever even knows that they can report this to the Consumer Product Safety Commission. And then this is a good video to look at on this channel, Safe Healthy Playing Fields channel. There's a number of videos. And on the Safe Healthy Playing Field website, there's also a number of videos that various people have produced. And so I mentioned that you can contact Safe Healthy Playing Fields and we can talk about more actions. And so I wanted to keep this pretty short. Diana and Diane could talk about the heat issues. I didn't even mention these get hotter than asphalt. And then the regulatory aspects of violation of the municipal stormwater permits. We can talk about that too. I didn't have time to get into Portland's municipal stormwater permit under the Clean Water Act, but that again, if you remember back to when I talked about that it's not sediment, it's a pollutant, solid waste, that should be regulated under the MS4 permits, and right now is not. So these are just some old slides. So anyway, so I will stop sharing, or so that you can see me, or I can go back to the resources slide, and maybe would you like Diane or Diana to say a few words, or go on to Dr. Brander?
Julia, I think you might be muted.
Julia?
All right.
Sorry, my mouse is being very sticky. And I was trying to make my way over to the mute button, but I would actually love it if Diana Conway could speak for a moment. We have a few more minutes in this part of the presentation about what's happening in Maryland.
Hey, Diana, are you on? I'll mute.
You should be able to unmute yourself now and turn your video on if you'd like to.
I think I can stop sharing.
Got it. Ta-da. Thanks. Hi, my name is Diana Conway. I'm the president of our nonprofit called Safe Healthy Playing Fields. And first of all, thank you guys for letting us join you tonight, and thank you for your interest in this issue. Kathy dragged me into this, we think about a dozen years ago. We're too old to remember that far back. But I've just been at it kind of constantly in shock that this is such an obvious problem, and it is a problem that's completely optional. It's a little bit like straws, but as Kathy said, it's just so much bigger, but it's optional the way a straw is, or an extra package of takeout ketchup. And the pushback we've had from the industry continues to stagger me. So we've been working on different bills in Massachusetts. We had some traction in Connecticut for a while. We found that we get the most traction in municipalities because the industries tend to be much more effective at the state legislative level than we or our chapter members are able to be. But in Maryland, after many years of working on this, we've got a bill in that is super slimmed down. I put the link in earlier. It's basically a simple chain of custody that is forcing transparency onto this industry, which has always said, oh, we want our members to be responsible, and we reuse, recycle, reduce, repurpose, we clean and reuse, but they can never show us a single example. So they don't know how many fields there are all these different organizations running it their own way, but there is a trade group. And so we've been working with the trade group and saying, how many fields, where are they, where do they go? You have all these templates for responsible behavior from your members. Are any of them performing these chain of custodies, these reuse or tracking? And the answer is no, they're not telling us they are. So they've checked all the boxes for having the resources for their members, but nobody's doing anything. So this bill, all it says is tell us where you got it and tell us where it went next. And then we'll put it up at the Maryland Department of Environment. And surprise, surprise, suddenly this chain of custody that they've said they're all in favor of for years as part of their responsible members plan, they're objecting to it after telling us that they would not. A week before the hearing, they're now suddenly saying they can't live with the bill the way it is. So I have become so much more cynical than I was, which was not a great starting spot. My purpose really in being here tonight is to encourage you to get involved and let you know that we have a lot of resources and a lot of experience in terms of going at the legislators, finding colleagues in other advocacy organizations that I think you guys, given how organized you are, you probably have more than most in terms of experience with that. And in addition to the science that Kathy's been talking about, there are other aspects that can catch the eye of people who may not be quite as focused on, things like PFAS and phthalates and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. These fields get super hot and people literally die on them. Heat is the highest avoidable source of high school football death in the entire, and it has been for years, according to the CDC. These fields get lethally hot at 160, 170 degrees. They're toxic, as Kathy mentioned. They have a very high injury rate, according to multiple peer-reviewed published studies, especially lower extremity. You've probably seen all kinds of video of football games with horrible ACL and ankle injuries. The orthopedic surgeon for the Ravens told us that it's almost a 2-to-1 comparison for injuries of lower extremities on synthetic turf versus grass fields. So there's the heat, there's the toxicity, there's the injury. The cost is 1.2 to 1.4 million per field, and they last anywhere from 5 to 10 years. And then you're stuck with 250 tons of mixed toxic plastic unrecyclable waste, and it has to be replaced. It's no different from, we compare it to, cocaine. Like if you have it and you get started with it, you've got to come back and get more, because going back to grass is prohibitively expensive unless you are the Ravens and can afford to do that. So it's hot, it's toxic, it has a high injury rate, it is very expensive, and of course, as Kathy pointed out, it is completely unrecyclable. There is no disposal solution, and so we find it dumped across the country and across Europe. There are just dramatic photos of literally mountains of rolled up plastic carpet with the tire crumb just falling out of it. And now we have evidence that the tire crumb is specifically behind 99% mortality in the coho salmon up and down the West Coast. So I put in a hearing link for Congresswoman Katie Porter, who held a hearing in July, specifically on that 6 ppd from tires, and specifically raised the question of, is it wise to put our kids on this stuff for playgrounds and fields from when they're little, possibly through college, if it's doing this to salmon? No answer yet from the US Tire Manufacturers Association. So sorry for rattling on. I'm just so pleased to be part of this group and glad for the chance to share what we've learned along the way.
And I'd like to add one thing. Diana mentioned that it's prohibitively expensive to go back to, can be prohibitively expensive to go back to grass once they do the synthetic turf. And it's not because grass is prohibitively expensive. It's because when they put the synthetic turf fields in, they take away all of the soil, or a lot, feet of the soil, and they put in rocks. So synthetic turf fields are literally huge plastic shag carpets on top of rocks, and with hundreds of tons of pulverized tires dumped on top of them. That is what these $1.2 million field carpets are. And the reason it's expensive to go back is you have to take away all those rocks, take away all the plastic rugs, which you have to do anyway every 5 to 10 years. But then you have to take away all the rocks, bring back the soil, and and redo the grass field. Whereas if they kept it grass to begin with, if they had a crappy grass field, which they could if they never constructed it correctly to begin with, they could take the opportunity for a lot less money to do a well-constructed grass field that drains well. It may or may not need irrigation or drainage, but they could put in drainage, put in the right type of grass, have it graded appropriately. And then the big thing to maintain it really is aeration, which apparently is very simple, and there's incredible.
We've been working with our nonprofit finally has set up a turf grass advisory panel of professionals around the country who, including the Turf Grass Producers International, to try to get them to focus on defending their business, which is growing grass. And the problem for them is it's different all over the country based on climate and soil, whereas with a plastic field, it's the same everywhere. You just take out dirt, put in rocks, cover it with plastic, and walk away for eight or 10 years. So we've been trying to work with them to get them to really focus on showing people the possible solutions, because there is a solution, and grass is safer, softer, cheaper, cooler, and you don't wind up with this terrible plastic and microplastic problem. Are we doing Q&A or?
We're going to do Q&A after. And so thank you so much for driving that home, especially the point of once you start with the plastic grass, you're really kind of stuck in a terrible loop. I want to welcome Dr. Susanne Brander. And so excited to read her incredible bio to you all. Here we go. Dr. Susanne Brander has been faculty at Oregon State University since 2017. After moving from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, where she was faculty for 4 years. She's been working on microplastics since 2014. Brander's research encompasses the fields of toxicology, endocrinology, and ecology, integrating molecular approaches with measurements at the organism and population level. Brander's main focus is on the effects of stressors such as emerging pollutants, plastics, and changing climate on aquatic organisms, but her research and teaching also spans the links between ecological and human health. She has a PhD in toxicology and pharmacology from UC Davis, and an MS, Master's in Environmental Science and Policy from Johns Hopkins University. So I'm excited to hear the light that she sheds on this issue, as in terms especially of water and healthy waterways.
Sure. And Julia, thank you so much. Oh, thank you so much for the introduction and for the invitation to chat with everyone tonight. And so my presentation, it's a bit of an overview of kind of the state of the science of the microplastics field. And then I'll get into a bit about chemicals and microplastics in general. I'll talk about a recent study that just came out a few months ago that looks specifically at a whole suite of different chemicals that were either leaching off of these fields, synthetic fields, or were found present, in the runoff, so in the plastics themselves and in the runoff, and compared indoor to outdoor. And then I'll kind of bring it back to the more general side of things and talk a little bit about some work I've been involved with in California, where they are starting to think about consumer safety for some of these types of products like chrome rubber and tire wear as well. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. And can everyone hear me all right?
Yes, and we see your presentation.
Okay, wonderful. It all worked. All right. And I see a couple of familiar names in the audience. I know some of you already work quite a bit on microplastics. So some of this might be things that you've heard before, but I've tried to pull from the more recent sort of syntheses. And there was a big special issue out in Science a few months ago too with some new information. So this is not dissimilar to some of the information that Kathleen had been showing in her presentation, but just to kind of bring it back to where we are and where we could be by 2040 or 2050. That seems to be the magic end post that people are talking about at this point, but at some point we're going to have to move that forward a little bit. But a paper that came out in 2020 in another special issue of Science that was a couple years back, tried to evaluate a few different scenarios. And so the red, of course, is our business as usual, which is unfortunately where it seems we're headed at this point, and you can see with business as usual, the line keeps going up, and we're going to be increasing our plastic pollution, our inputs to the environment quite considerably, even just in the next less than 20 years. And really the only way to get that plastic production to decrease is if we do something called a system change scenario. And this has become kind of a buzz term in some plastic research circles, and something that a lot of us are starting to think about, but we don't really know exactly how to push for it, because as pointed out, even if you're just considering this issue of the use of crumb rubber and infill in athletic fields, it's so complex. And I know from talking to people who worked on the 6-PPD issue, for example, that it took them years to hone in on that chemical that was causing that toxicity, because it's so difficult to get information from manufacturers, as you all know. So, and we know that the stuff sticks around forever. So a good example is for high density polyethylene bottles and pipes. Those have a half-life of 58 and 1200 years respectively. So it's not just the type of plastic, but it's what it exists as, what it's made into, that influences how long it takes to break down. And we know that plastic waste generation, packaging is really the #1 source. But just in the past, I would say, as someone who's been researching plastics for about 6-7 years now, some newer sources are starting to arrive on the radar of researchers. And somehow tire wear is one of those new sources, even though it's something that maybe should have been pretty apparent to all of us, that this was something that was going to be abraded off of tires, getting into the atmosphere, getting into our waterways. And you can see that transportation is down here in yellow at 17 million tons estimated, generated in 2015. It's probably gone up a little bit at this point. And then the crumb rubber is probably mixed in with this building and construction as well. So it's unclear which category that would be counted in. So by 2030, annual plastics emissions are predicted to reach at least 20 million metric tons per year, unless we make those concerted system level changes. So what about chemicals in plastics? Well, we all know there are lots of chemicals used to make plastics, to add to them as fillers or as plasticizers, to make them into the diverse number of forms that we see them in, to make them into different shapes, to make them flexible or more rigid, for example, depending on what their purpose is, what they're going to be used for. So right now, over 2,400 substances are identified as being of potential concern. These are substances used in plastic, and many of them are hardly studied, so the safety thresholds aren't really known. Something that the field has really been focusing on over the past few years is sort of the fate of these chemicals. And it turns out that our exposure to these chemicals kind of depends on where we encounter the plastic. And so in a lot of cases, animals in aquatic environments, they're exposed to the plastic after those chemicals have leached off or weathered. Not to say that makes it safer for the environment, because the chemicals are still in the water or in the sediment, but the animal isn't necessarily exposed to the chemical. It might just be exposed to the particle. Whereas for humans, if you're being exposed to something that is in a plastic cup, that's something you're going to get exposed to when you heat that plastic cup, or when you eat repeatedly as you're using it. So it kind of depends on where that exposure happens. California has really made quite a few strides over the past couple of years in terms of thinking about microplastics and getting some true strategies for tackling microplastics kind of on the books. And in 2020, they proposed the first definition of microplastics in drinking water. This definition is now basically being used as the definition for microplastics in the state of California. I think it will probably be adopted by others. Europe is thinking, like ECHA, for example, they're thinking along similar lines. And they've really broadened the types of materials that are considered to be quote unquote microplastic. You know, it's not just the plastic from plastic bottles, it's anything that is a solid polymeric material to which chemical additives or other substances may have been added. And the particles have to have at least 2 dimensions that are greater than 1 and less than 5,000 micrometers. And this ends up including things like tire wear particles, things like crumb rubber, things like semi-synthetic fibers, such as cellulose acetate, which is used to make cigarette filters. So it's really a more all-encompassing definition that is better aligned with what researchers like me and the folks in my lab are finding in fish or in bivalves or in otter scat, for example. We're finding this very complex mix of not just plastics, but all of the materials that humans use in their daily lives. And so I think they're trying to be a bit more broadly considerate of all these different types of materials. So what about synthetic turf and crumb rubber? It turns out synthetic turf and crumb rubber are at least considered by the state of California to officially be microplastics. And again, the study I mentioned that was published a few months ago found many chemicals of concern in crumb rubber and synthetic turf. This isn't the first study, but I thought they did a really good job of characterizing the content in the plastics themselves, as well as the content in the runoff water. And they looked at all of the different polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are chemicals that are found in fossil fuels. And they looked at all of the PAHs that are currently regulated by the Environmental Protection Agency, as well as a suite of different plasticizers. And they found kind of the same general mix in these 50 crumb rubber samples. They were all from football fields. This was a study done in Europe, so football fields means soccer fields. So we're basically talking about the same thing here that Kathleen was referring to. And they found that same general mix of PAHs and plasticizers in the indoor and outdoor fields, and similar content in runoff as well. Although something important they brought up was that the concern for human exposure is probably higher for indoors than for outdoors. Not to say that outdoors isn't an issue, and the fact that that kids are getting injured and burned from these fields is a huge concern, but when you're thinking about the inhalation exposure as well, indoor fields are definitely a bigger concern, and those concentrations can potentially be higher. So you can just see from these graphs that they found kind of the same mix, and these are all abbreviated, but they're all different PAHs. And you can see that there are similar findings between the runoff water, the indoor football pitches, and I'm not showing the graph, but there was also one for outdoor pitches as well. So why does it matter that these PAHs are running off from these fields, or they're getting inhaled by the people using them? Well, PAHs, as I believe Kathleen mentioned a bit in her presentation, are endocrine disrupting compounds, as are plasticizers. I'm sure we've all heard of bisphenol A. Another really concerning plasticizer are phthalates, which are used in many different types of plastics, and there's a whole long list of other plastic types that are also of potential concern. But all of these different molecules, and I won't get into the organic chemistry side of things, they basically can trick cells into thinking that they are an estrogen molecule or a testosterone molecule or some other hormone that's naturally produced by the body, because they're similar enough in shape and size to interact with the same cellular receptors. And I won't go into all the nitty-gritty details on this slide, but basically what's pictured here is a cell, and what's highlighted or circled in red is either an endogenous hormone, like say estradiol, which you produce naturally, or an EDC, which would be something like a polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon, maybe running off from one of these fields. Those can cross cellular membranes and then interact with all of these different receptors and proteins inside your cells, and that's what causes the different downstream health effects that can happen after exposure to these chemicals. Perfluorinated chemicals are similar in that way. So what should be concerned about? And obviously there's a huge concern for human health, for use of this crumb rubber in fields, particularly considering that people are getting exposed when they're young. And there have been countless studies showing that early life exposure to endocrine disrupting compounds can lead to later life effects, and often it's difficult to trace those effects that happen later in life back to an exposure event. There's a cartoon I should show that basically has instructions written on the side of microwave popcorn, and it says microwave for 3 minutes, enjoy, wait 30 years for endocrine disrupting disease to possibly occur, and it's funny but not funny. But other things that are happening to the environment as a result of these crumb rubber fields are that the microplastics from those fields are interacting as they slough off, as they run off into the environment, as they're disturbed, and maybe there's also atmospheric deposition. When they interact with the natural environment, they can cause changes in sediment communities and soil communities. So what this picture is showing are effects on the microbiome of the soil after it's exposed to microplastics, and basically just showing that the species of microbiota shifts when microplastics are present, because different types of bacteria thrive in areas where microplastics are present versus areas where they aren't. And of course, we know these plastics are also transferred through food webs. Our work has shown that this happens at the very base of the food web, even with organisms such as tintinnid ciliates, which are single-celled eukaryotes that are found in marine and freshwater environments. They use cilia to create a current when they encounter food items. They can't see, right? They're kind of randomly taking things in. And a study that we published back in 2020, and then another one that we published in 2021, showed that these microscopic zooplankton can basically be a vector for delivery of particles that a fish or something larger wouldn't necessarily see as food. And so this includes all different types of microplastics, including tire wear particles, which in work that's ongoing right now, we've shown that larval fish and mysid shrimp, which is another small zooplankton commonly fed upon off the Oregon coast by gray whales and other important organisms like salmonids. They also readily take up things like tire wear particles and fibers. So what does this do to aquatic organisms? And I'm showing a summary here, but what we see in our lab is similar to what other people are observing in studies done across lots of different taxonomic groups. And as a field, we're beginning to converge on some commonalities here in terms of what the most frequent types of responses are. So things like growth impacts and oxidative stress are two of the main toxic responses being seen at the apical level or at the organism level is growth. You often see a decrease in growth because when an organism takes in a microplastic, it's taking up space in its stomach that otherwise would be taken up by food. It often causes a sense of false fullness as well. On the oxidative stress side, you see that happening when either the chemicals associated with the plastic or the plastics themselves are interacting with cells and causing cells to respond and generate oxidative compounds like hydrogen peroxide, which can then cause damage to the cells. So what about humans, sort of bringing it back to humans? Well, we're definitely exposed via seafood, which is something that my group and collaborators focus on quite a bit. We've been doing a study in collaboration with Portland State University. Dr. Elise Granick is leading this work, funded by Oregon Sea Grant. And her work in collaboration with our lab is showing that 7 or 8 different species that are commonly purchased at coastal markets or grocery stores in Oregon all contain mainly microfibers. So not surprising, and we've known for a long time that that's a source of exposure. But now we also know that we're exposed by so many other routes, from tap water to things like beer and milk. And one of our top exposure routes might be air. And so bringing this back to tire and road wear and crumb rubber particles, the smaller particles can be suspended in air either through agitation or wind, and we can inhale those. And that's especially concerning for indoor exposures, where the microplastic content in the air is going to be a bit higher. Won't go into too many details here, but the main point I wanted to get across with this slide is that there are really two different main routes of exposure when it comes to plastics. You have the chemical exposure, which is shown up here on top. And so those are the 2,400 chemicals that we don't have enough information on, but we know they're toxic in some way. So everything from additives to dyes to plasticizers. And then there's the physical component. And so that's the impact of the particle being inhaled and getting caught in the lungs, or being ingested and causing physical disruption to the lining of the stomach, for example. So you can think of every little piece of microplastic as kind of a multiple stressor, because it's causing effects through a variety of different mechanisms. So animals, including humans, are exposed from many sources to the POPs used in plastic manufacturing, as well as the particles themselves. And I like this slide because it kind of gives an overview of the two main ways we're exposed, through inhalation and ingestion, and all the ways that a plastic can lead to high cytotoxicity, or high toxicity to our cells, which can then scale up to other effects and other long-term concerns. But inhalation and ingestion are our two main exposure routes. So just bringing it back to crumb rubber, and that, excuse me, my mouth got a little bit dry, and that we are exposed to these particles in a number of different ways, the chemicals and the particles themselves, potentially through inhalation. For kids who are little enough, maybe there's a concern for ingestion as well, but definitely a potential health concern, and a concern for the aquatic environment as well as the terrestrial environment when we're thinking about things like soil health, aquatic health, and the documented propensity of aquatic organisms to basically, especially at those lower levels of the food web, to eat whatever is presented to them. So just want to kind of end this on a positive note. And Charlie actually asked an interesting question, I thought, in the chat about this, about Oregon Senate Bill 582. I do wonder if there is going to be some momentum to hold the producers of some of these products that are used in synthetic turf, the producers of crumb rubber that are putting down these fields. Will there be an incentive to hold those producers responsible via this producer responsibility organization that has been proposed and legislation that's been passed? So it'll be interesting to see what happens going forward with that. I imagine it won't be an easy road, but at least there's a little bit of an incentive for the government to start to think about this more, the state government. And I wanted to end it just with a quick summary slide of a little bit more about what I do for my day job. Myself and my colleague, Dr. Stacy Harper, and another colleague at Western Washington University, Dr. Wayne Landis, we all lead the Pacific Northwest Consortium on Plastics. And just wanted to give our heads up that our next teleconference will be on May 2nd. And we're excited to we're going to be having Senator Doss from Washington State and Senator Bonamici from Oregon, as well as a number of researchers from universities and nonprofits as well, presenting a bit of research on regional exposure to microplastics in seafood in water and sediment samples, for example. So if you're interested in more information, our website is there, as well as our Twitter handle and my email address too. So thank you so much. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brander. You've made the chain effect of the crumb rubber in our waterways and in our bodies really very clear. I appreciate that, and you're doing such good work. We could open up the questions and just kind of follow the chat along and maybe start from the top. We have about 12 minutes. So you've actually just answered the SB 582, which is fabulous, but maybe we'll move on to if grass is cost prohibitive, does it favor those that can afford it? And I think we're talking about inclusivity, and can you speak to what the grass solutions look like? And this was sort of answered in the chat, but if anybody wants to speak to that, they will.
This is Diana, and I'd be happy to try to answer that. There are two aspects to the cost. One is the capital cost up front of a major installation like synthetic turf versus the ongoing maintenance cost of a grass field. And I think as a matter of reality, everybody likes a good capital campaign and a ribbon cutting versus the unsexiness of another operating budget allocation for another aeration and feeding and mowing budget line item. So there's that aspect of the cost. And then there's also the marketing that the synthetic turf industry does. And Kathy mentioned a little bit their pitch that it's maintenance free and it lasts forever and you can play on it all the time. And it's just a wonderful product. What they don't tell you is you can't play on it if you're gonna die of exertional heat stroke. You can't play on it if you're wearing cleats. You can't play on it if you can't use any kind of metal stakes or spikes on it. You can't have, the CDC recommends you don't eat on it. You can't sit on it if it's too hot. You can't do band drills on it because that violates the warranty. So there are marketing aspects to the cost where the industry will come in and say, look, all you got to do is get this one big cost through and then you're done. You have no maintenance costs. Whereas the grass field, I mean, it's kind of like flossing your teeth, right? You got to do it all the time or it doesn't work. And hopefully the floss doesn't have PFAS on it to make it slippery. So what we try to say is that the cost, and I answered some of this in the chat, but the cost up front of a really high quality grass field with a sand cap, which is what helps it drain so it doesn't get muddy and it recovers quickly, with irrigation and the rest of it, according to all the literally national and international experts we've spoken to who work on sports fields, that cost in the US is anywhere between $275,000 and $275,000 and $375,000. And if you figure a synthetic turf field costs you $1 million once every, being generous, once every 10 to 12 years, although probably not that long, you still have a huge amount of money between what you would pay for a grass field and that 1 million. And so you have a maintenance budget built in. But again, what we've found talking to grass people is those are the maintenance budgets that get cut over and over when school systems or park systems are squeezed, or municipalities have to find extra money to deal with COVID or deal with some other urgent aspect. So that is part of the problem. And then, as I mentioned, the second problem is really that whereas synthetic turf is a plug and play product, grass fields are different everywhere. So the grass industry is not as unified in its voice and its advocacy and its marketing to reach all these communities that one by one, a single high school, a single park is being infiltrated by an industry that is making money hand over fist. They're selling trash for $1 million a field, and then you have to come back and buy more. It's a great business model.
Thank you, Diana, for answering that so well.
Yeah,
Kathleen, do you have something brief to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to address, so in addition to the upfront, the huge difference in upfront costs and the fact that you don't have to replace grass, which right there, as Diana mentioned, gives you this huge cushion of advantage in cost to grass. But there's this myth that synthetic turf is low maintenance free, or even low maintenance, when in reality, if there's a whole lot of maintenance that needs to be done for synthetic turf. And that's been outlined in the managers, synthetic turf, the Sports Turf Managers Association and others have kind of outlined what needs to be done. The problem is a lot of buyers buy it, with that myth in mind, and then don't take care of it, and then it breaks down faster, and it needs to be replaced even sooner, and it's even less safe for the players. And so to actually maintain a synthetic turf field, to not void the warranty, and to be as safe as possible for the players, it's almost about the same as a grass field. So, and if it goes to 12 years, I mean, you're talking about something that's as hard as concrete. One of the reasons that, for example, the field that kind of got me into this was my son's high school field, top of the line field they put in. It had to be replaced at 6 years because it was literally as hard as concrete at that time. And you can imagine, because it's just a plastic carpet on rocks, that's what happens. And if it's not maintained, you get turf pothole, you basically, all that tire crumb leaves. So, and they have, one of the things that you don't have to do for a grass field that you do have to do for a synthetic turf field, and they often don't, is that hardness testing. And if they don't do that, then the players are more prone to concussions and other injuries. So this myth of cost, natural grass is by far and away, no matter how you calculate it, much more cost effective than synthetic turf can ever be.
Thank you, Kathleen. This is an interesting question to me. It came a little later, but we've talked a lot about tires. And then there's this ongoing conversation about plastic roads. And it seemed to be a great way to recycle plastics and manage plastic waste. I wonder actually if Dr. Brander has any input on that, if it's similar, still as much of a problem.
Yeah, that's actually becoming more and more commonplace. And some states like California, I think maybe Arizona and Texas, have been using recycled plastic in asphalt mixtures for some time now. This is something I learned about when doing some proposal writing a couple of years ago. We didn't end up getting funded to work on this at the time, but there's a lot of interest in how much of that plastic is then being re-suspended into the environment as those roads wear down. But the trade-off is that when the plastics are incorporated and mixed into the asphalt, that the roads last longer. And so it's a matter, I feel like a cost-benefit analysis needs to be done, because it doesn't seem like it's a great idea to be putting plastics into roads, but if we have this excess plastic material, what are we going to do with it? What is the best way to dispose of it so it's not introduced to the environment? And that's there's actually a group at OSU in the engineering department that does a lot of work on asphalt mixtures and durability, and they're thinking about some of these questions now. Something else I learned, which I had no idea, people are also using recycled bulletproof vests to strengthen roads. So some of the recycled plastics used in these asphalt mixtures are the fibers from those vests. So yeah, a lot is unknown, and research needs to be done to find out how much of that is being is running off into the environment or being resuspended.
Yeah, and I'd like to address, I've done just some research, about that, not, hands-on research, but just looking into it. There's a couple of problems. There's, of course, the fact that it wears down, because the roads wear down anyway, and it's the plastic and tire crumb. They're usually talking about more tire crumb than plastic. But one thing to remember is that asphalt that's used for roads is 95% rocks and sand. So we're just talking about 5%, okay, of the road that this is going to go into. And asphalt is one of the most recyclable things on the planet. you never see piles of asphalt dumped anywhere. Like you saw those turf, synthetic turf mountains. You don't see that with asphalt. I mean, think about it, because every bit of asphalt is recycled. When they add plastics and tire crumb into it, that ruins the recyclability, apparently. That's one of the things I've been reading. So you turn something that's infinitely recyclable into something that becomes a total waste. And trying to separate out the rocks and the sand from the plastic, which are totally recyclable, from the plastic waste is like almost impossible, apparently. And they don't necessarily last as long. So the properties that you need for a road, particularly in apparently some colder climates, whatever, apparently are not there. So they're still trying to work on it, because this is a huge boon for, the tire industry. What the tire industry should be doing, not to mention the plastic industry, but I mean, this is another aspect of this whole thing. What they should be doing is recycling tires back into tires. And all of these basically polluting for profit, which is what they're doing in synthetic turf fields, if they put in roads or whatever, are disincentives for them to invest in closed loop recycling. So recycling tires back into tires and to detoxifying their tire mixtures so that they don't. So that's a really important point. So whenever anybody brings up one of these quote unquote recycling, repurposing uses of tire waste and plastic, think about what actually should be done with those. There should be a closed loop, and where they're going to end up. If they're going to end up out in the environment anyway, it's not appropriate. If they're going to affect the recyclability of, something that's already recyclable, then obviously not a good idea.
And that's a really good point about it affecting the recyclability of the asphalt. And something else I've heard is that they're starting to think about including plastic water bottles, broken down plastic water bottles as part of those mixtures as well. Because what do we if we just want to make the water bottles disappear, right?
Right.
Not going to
Sweep
be
it
the
up
end
and
result. Yeah.
sweep it into the road instead of under the carpet. Right?
There were a lot of really wonderful questions that I don't think we're going to be able to get to. I'm curious if there's just a quick answer on how about the stormwater permits for transfer stations and landfills, and what generally prompts a contaminant to get added, or how might that process start? And then maybe finally after that, we could talk about what we might do here in Portland to begin fighting this issue.
That is a really good question about the stormwater permits, and a question, exactly that same question that we're asking here in Maryland, for example, because it's not being, we have some experts in stormwater management, just like one of the commenters here, who want synthetic turf to be included and want plastic waste, basically pulverized plastic waste, to be included under these permits. And so I'm trying to figure out, we're all trying to figure out how that can get added. They need, total TMDLs, total minimum daily loads and of certain items, and how do you get that added into the stormwater permits? So as I pointed out earlier, it's not being acknowledged as a waste right now. And so that's a totally good question. I don't have a good answer yet, because I'm looking for the answer myself, as we all are. But asking that question is the first step. And then making sure that we get answers from those who are involved.
And then I saw, for at least getting involved here in Portland, one thing was that we reach out to Safe Healthy Playing Fields. Another was to report if there's any injuries. You really stressed that, so that we get some data on that. And then perhaps another was to reach out to Dr. Brander about your work, if there's good overlap there.
Yeah. The other thing I can, so just, going back to kind of where Safe Healthy, where a lot of us who are working on this throughout the country, if you see a synthetic turf field, ask where it's going to be disposed of. If one is going to go in your neighborhood, advocate against it, advocate for grass. I mean, there's all the arguments that we're making are really good arguments not to put synthetic turf in. There really is no good arguments for synthetic turf. The arguments they do make are myths. If they choose not to manage grass, they're choosing, if they don't manage synthetic turf appropriately, it hurts the players, but the field doesn't care. If grass isn't managed appropriately, it will show you, and by showing you, it also helps the safety of the students and the athletes who are playing on it. So it really is a choice, and so you want to start advocating for the health and safety of the children and the athletes who are playing on these fields, and grass is what they need. And cost-wise, they should be putting for the cost of a couple of synthetic turf fields, they can, construct and manage, 5 to 10 top of the line grass fields. They're choosing not to do that, and there's a lot of reasons, and we can go into that now. A lot of the industry is it's a deep-pocketed industry, and this is a cash cow that they don't want to give up.
And Dr. Brander, do you have any last words for us?
Oh, I was just going to say thank you to Kathleen and Diana for all of the wonderful work that you're doing to try to raise awareness about the concerns regarding these types of fields. I of course have a work-related interest in having a better understanding of how crumb rubber particles and tire and road wear particles are affecting organisms, and we'll be, hopefully, fingers crossed, having a paper or two coming out about that in a month or so. And I also have a personal interest in this, as I have a 5.5-year-old who turns out to be really good at soccer, and she just started playing last year. And all of the fields in Corvallis are grass, but I'm sure we're going to get to a point that won't be the case. And so definitely a personal interest too, and it's a huge concern.
Yeah, no, it takes parents and kids. Kids are starting to get, children have actually gone to our Board of Education and saying, why are you doing this to us? Children are starting to ask, why are we, this was the most poignant one, why do we have to play on the hottest part of the school, in the hottest part of the schoolyard? Mm-hmm. I mean, and this was, this wonderful field that they created for the kids, but it's, too hot to play on. Mm-hmm. And we didn't even bring up as I mentioned, the playgrounds, which are a whole similar issue in terms of the tire rubber part of it.
Right.
But
and the other issue with the heat is that's going to cause chemicals to volatilize, and so those chemicals become more bioavailable too. But that's another presentation. So.
Right.
I'm gonna do that for now.
Thank you all so much. This is a huge topic, and it's great to just get the conversation started. Really appreciate everybody who came and our presenters for being here to share with us. And there's some great links. I hope people have been following along with the links that have been shared in the chat for learning more. Everybody have a great night.
Thank you
very much for setting this up. And yeah, I hope, will you be able to share the chat with the people who participated?
I think that should be possible.
Yes, we will.
Cool. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.